So, I've been on a huge musical kick lately, and on top of the usual big names like Wicked and Hamilton, I've found myself drawn to a subgenre of musicals I did not realize was its own genre: Greek mythology musicals. It started with Hadestown, at least for me, though it's not my favorite musical ever. And after playing the game Stray Gods, and finally getting around to listening to Epic at my friend's insistence, I became curious if there were more musicals taking on the idea of adapting myths or even using the setting to tell original stories, and found some I had never heard of, and was pleasantly surprised to see how common it actually is as a concept. After all, the stories of Greek mythology actually work really well as musical ideas. There's plenty of stories of musicians and multiple gods that are associated with music, and ancient Greece was really into stage plays. So there is a lot that a composer or writer could play around with. Plus, it works on a storytelling front, as a lot of the myths are already chock full of tragedy and melodrama. So it makes sense to take advantage of that kind of setting when creating a stage musical or concept album. And as someone who enjoys both musicals and mythology, I am personally happy to see these two things get together and love seeing how the creators adapt and adjust the stories to fit the medium. So I wanted to talk about the Greek mythology musicals I've been going back to a lot lately and why I like them. Starting with the ones I found from a Reddit recommendation and working my way through to the three I already knew of and liked. But before I get started, I should take the time to mention that I am not a Greek mythology or theater expert by any stretch. I'm just someone who likes to yap about media I like. So I apologize in advance if this whole video sounds like the Dunning-Kruger effect in action. I am not claiming to be a media critic, just a nerd with a lot of thoughts. This is mostly an opinion piece, and while I did do some research to help organize my thoughts / make sure I got basic facts right, I won't be going too much into detail about the production or themes of these musicals beyond what you've probably already seen. Alright, let's not waste any more time on rambling. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and let's get started with
As you come nearer, the future's clear and all.
So this one might end up being the shortest section of the video, as I don't have a lot I can unpack that YouTuber Dustin Reckling didn't already do with his video. I also only found out the Golden Apple existed when doing research for this script, so I haven't had as much time to let the story and music sit with me as much as the others. Produced in 1954 and written by Jerome Morose and John Latouche. Apologies if I butchered that. The Golden Apple is less of an adaptation and more loosely inspired by the Iliad and the Odyssey, set in Washington, D.C. after the Spanish-American War. It is not an accurate retelling, but it's not trying to be. The musical seems to be going for a more campy, whimsical vibe, rather than an epic with lots of tragedy and commentary on the hubris of humanity. There's not a lot of recorded versions that I was able to find, which isn't too surprising. It was made in the 50s and didn't take off like The King and I or Singing in the Rain, so there's just not a lot of this musical that's preserved. With all that said though, I'm glad I gave this musical a watch, even if it was a little hard to follow at times, at least in the version I watched from 1977. While the story is not exactly deep, it is charming. The music was very much a product of its time, so it wasn't my favorite out of this list, but it was still enjoyable and well made, even if it's not to my personal taste. I probably won't be listening to too many of these songs in the car, but there are a few that I did add to my playlist after just one listen. Lazy Afternoon and My Picture in the Papers were probably my favorites, with the latter feeling like it could be right at home in Mary Poppins.
It's a lazy afternoon, and the farmer leaves his reaping, in the meadow cows are sleeping. Oh, it's grand to see my picture in the papers. I adore a life that has a dash of spice. My reputation's battered, but it really hasn't mattered. Every lad about is mad about this bird of paradise.
And Lazy Afternoon seems to be the biggest song to come out of the musical. It has a lot of covers, even some pretty recent ones. So if you're a sucker for 50s camp, I recommend giving this one a try.
It's a myth, you're hoping for a fantasy. It's a fable.
Mythic the Musical was another one that was not on my radar before I started to do research for this video, and I was pleasantly surprised by how much I liked the album. Written and composed by Marcus Stevens and Orrin Eldor, Mythic the Musical debuted in 2018 in London. It's a modern retelling of the myth of Persephone and Hades with a focus on comedy and romance rather than tragedy. And the dynamic of the gods has been reimagined to be a sort of celebrity-like culture, at least from what I could tell from the recording, and from the few clips I've been able to find online, although not all of them are from the London production. It doesn't seem to be sung through, so I'm sure I'm missing some nuance between the songs. Plus, there's no Wikipedia page, which was surprising. Now, the story of Hades and Persephone is a bit of a controversial topic online. There's a lot of works of fiction trying to retell the myth in a way that's less traumatic and more romantic. And I can kinda see why. The daughter of the goddess of the harvest falling in love with a god associated with death sounds like the perfect setup for an opposites attract/forbidden love story. And Persephone herself is practically the perfect catalyst for pastel goth Tumblr art. So I can see the appeal. Modern adaptations of the Persephone myth get a lot of flack for ignoring the themes and making a kidnapper sympathetic, especially since they occasionally fall into the trap of making Demeter an overbearing mother, or mother figure in the case of God's School, in order to make Hades look better. And Mythic kind of does this as well, at least in the beginning. And while I do agree that it is frustrating, especially considering the original story is about a young woman getting kidnapped, forced into a marriage she didn't want, and her mom spiraling in grief as a result. The original myth was a reflection of the very real scenarios many young Greek women found themselves in, married off to men they didn't know because their dad said it was okay. And both the young women and their moms were powerless to stop it. But I would argue that, while it is good to recognize the original myth for what it was instead of insisting that the relationship was fine actually, and that Hades isn't actually that bad, it does make sense that modern retellings would take on more modern issues that people face today. At least in most industrialized or developed countries, arranged marriages are not really a dark reality for most young women anymore. But dealing with the high expectations set upon us by our overbearing but well-meaning parents is a very common issue for a lot of people. So I'm not too surprised to see this pop up in modern adaptations. But I do understand why so many Greek mythology nerds online find this kind of change frustrating, as it sort of implies the author only had a surface level understanding of the myth. They see the gross story of a young woman marrying her kidnapper and see that they have a somewhat functional relationship in other myths, at least compared to Zeus and Hera, not that that's a high bar, and want to make the relationship more about equals rather than a marriage born from a crime, while also presumably giving Persephone some agency in her own story. And I know this isn't meant to be a video about Hades and Persephone specifically, but this is not the last musical that has them as major characters, so I wanted to address the sort of debate, at least online, about how modern adaptations tell their story and whether or not that's a good thing. But going back to Mythic, I do enjoy the story for what it is. It's not overly deep or anything, but it was a fun listen. The songs are memorable and the vocal performances are really good. I'll definitely be coming back to this soundtrack in the future.
Sweet summer days, that's the only gift I have to offer. I bring the sweet summer haze.
Tim Oxborough, who plays Zeus, kinda reminds me of Alex Brightman a little bit.
Rebellious children have cursed my family tree. I gotta manage them well so they don't rebel on me.
And Georgia Westall and Daniela Bowen give great performances as Persephone and Demeter.
It's irreversible. It's my kid, I can't think twice. Guess I've gotta roll the dice. Hope it's worth the sacrifice, 'cause it's irreversible. If I let this garden cast its spell, it's forever. Will I regret it? Who can tell? Will I be alone in hell? If I am, I'll still be home. So is it just as well? No mistaking, it's irreversible. This move
The comedy of the songs can arguably be a little cringy at times, but if you go in knowing it's not going to be that serious, it flows a lot better. Though it kind of gives off the vibe that it might be more for younger audiences, particularly with its focus on angst and frustration towards parental figures. And Persephone's story is more of a coming-of-age arc than anything else, which isn't really a complaint, it just means it didn't jive with me as much as the other musicals here. I found a review from a blogger by the name of Musical Manda that mentions it might be a good intro to Greek mythology for teens and kids, as it's just more fun and approachable than the original stories. And I have to say I'd agree. I can absolutely see teens being into this. I mean, I would have been way into this when I was 15. And if you're like me and were a bit disappointed by Persephone's story or lack of development in the webcomic Lore Olympus, I will say her story is way more satisfying here, mainly because it actually goes somewhere.
He fell in love with Persephone, who was gathering flowers in the light of the sun.
Now we move on to the first musical that most people have actually heard of, and one of the three that inspired me to make this video. Hadestown started in Vermont in 2006 and was reworked in 2012 and eventually made its way to Broadway in 2019. Written and composed by Anais Mitchell and directed by Rachel Chavkin. Hadestown, for those who may not know, is a loose retelling of the myth of Orpheus, who went down to the underworld to get his lover, Eurydice, back after she dies tragically. It was and remains a pretty big hit and won a lot of awards, and it's not hard to see why. The music in Hadestown is very good, and from what I've been able to see from clips online, I can see why it won a Tony for scenic design. I like that they included a character narrating certain parts of the story, particularly because it does help with the context, but also ancient Greek plays would usually have their own narrator in the form of a chorus. So it makes sense to have something similar here. The story of Orpheus is a pretty good basis for a musical. He's the son of the muse Calliope and is famous for his musical talent, and his story is just dripping in tragedy. I do also really like the idea of placing the story in a more industrialized world, and the music is more jazzy and bluesy than you would expect of a story like this. And it works really well. At least for me, I love this kind of vibe. I personally love dark Americana music, and while Hadestown doesn't quite fit that genre style, it does remind me of it. A lot's already been said about its underlining political messaging, and its themes have become more relevant over the years. Why We Build the Wall in particular became shockingly poignant only 4 years after the musical debuted.
How does the wall keep us free? My children, how does the wall keep us free?
How does the wall keep us free? The wall keeps out the enemy.
Its commentary on how tyrannical leaders use fear to keep their subjects loyal and unquestioning is depressingly topical for an almost 20-year-old musical. And I do think the choice to have Hades be a factory runner who manipulates and exploits vulnerable people is an interesting choice, as was the unnatural changes in the environment topside being caused by his strained marriage with Persephone. Like Mythic though, it does change the abduction of Persephone to a normal marriage that Persephone consented to, but has become tense and unhappy over the years. Again, your enjoyment of this might depend on how you feel about that kind of change. But I think it works here, as their years-long but strained relationship serves as an interesting contrast to the main couple. But their marriage problems also act as a sort of catalyst to the issues the main couple face, mainly the climate change causing severe storms and famine, which actually directly leads to Eurydice ending up in Hadestown. Well, that plus Orpheus's unintentional neglect. Political messages aside, I also really like the character performances here, at least in the recorded version. Reeve Carney is great at emoting through his singing, and Patrick Page's voice is just perfectly deep and intimidating for Hades. Wedding Song and How Long are both great.
Lover, tell me if you can, who's gonna buy the wedding dance? Times being what they are, hard and getting harder all the time.
Of his chest and his heart is a bird on a spit in his chest. How long, how long, how long?
How long? Just as long as Hades is king.
Wait for Me and its reprise are probably the most famous songs from the musical for good reason.
Through the underground, under cover of night, laying low, staying out of sight. Ain't no compass, brother. Ain't no map, just a telephone wire and a railroad map. Keep on walking and don't look back till you get to the bottom line.
Wait for me, I'm coming. Wait, I'm coming with you. Wait for me, I'm coming too, I'm coming too.
And damn, did promises get me emotional.
You take me home with you. Let's go. Let's go right now.
Okay, let's go. How?
We'll walk. You know the way. We'll just go back the way you came.
It's a long road, it's a long walk, back into the cold and dark. Are you sure you want to go?
Take me home.
I see the word hope mentioned a lot in reviews and discussions around Hadestown, and it really does fit. The composer really knew how to give the audience hope, even if you've already heard the story before.
Like a boat lost at sea, with no sails, not a breeze, I am drifting cold waters, no star to be seen.
So Stray Gods is going to be an interesting topic here, as unlike the other musicals in this video, it's actually a game, not a stage show or a concept album. Released in 2023 and partially funded by a Kickstarter campaign, it was developed by a new studio, Summerfall Studios, founded by BioWare vet David Gator, who also wrote for this game. And I'm a huge Dragon Age fan, so while I completely missed that this game was in development and even released, I did buy the game as soon as I saw the trailer because I loved the premise. And it's been living rent-free in my head ever since. And not just because of the music, though that is part of it. The art style isn't groundbreaking, but it is nice to look at, and I really like the character designs. Apollo and Persephone are both great examples of how to design characters from a mythology in a modern adaptation. They both have little details that fit the character you would expect, while also being unique to the story they are in. The designs may seem a little strange at first glance, as they don't really look anything like the classic artwork you usually see them in, but that's intentional. Without going too much into it in case I actually convince someone to play this game, all of the gods you meet in the game have had a long time to change fundamentally as people. But they all change in a way that's believable for what they've been through. The story and plot are not perfect, and I kind of wish it was a little longer, but it was a fun ride. I love how the story explores trauma and grief and how it can make people stuck in the past, even if it's been decades since the event. And then there's the voice acting. It's great. I have no notes. Other than, holy shit, this cast is stacked. I had no idea Laura Bailey and Troy Baker could sing, and I am so happy to see them here. And if you're a Critical Role fan, you might be excited to see that Laura does a small duet with Ashley Johnson in the first 10 minutes of the game. I'm not really a Felicia Day fan, but I do really like her performance. If you like Rent, or even if you hated Rent but thought the cast was too talented for it, you might like to know that Anthony Rapp has a small part in the main game and is a main character of the DLC, which is also where Tom Cardy gets his own cameo, which is always a win. And while I was not familiar with the rest of the cast, everyone brings their A-game here. Moving on to the music, it is an interesting topic when discussing this game. I mean, duh, it is a musical, because the songs not only directly tie into the plot, but are also how the story and character choices are made. The game utilizes a BioWare-like choice system not just for the dialogue and romance, but the player also has the ability to choose how each song plays out. Yep, the composer, Austin Wintory, went through the process of making several different versions of not just the songs, but the parts of those songs. The verses, chorus, and even some backgrounds of most of the songs change depending on what choices the player made earlier in that song. And the variety gets pretty wild. There's even charts and graphs going over just how many variations of each song you can get. The game uses a green, blue, red system to represent the player character's, Grace, personality, allowing the player to choose between being charismatic, clever, or aggressive. But you're also not limited to those choices after you pick a personality type. You can play out each song more or less however you want, with the exception of one choice in the second half of the game that does directly change the ending for a minor character. So while not every song is a banger, there is an option of changing up the song to something that fits your taste a lot better.
Go home, little girl. The shadows drawing near, and you all alone. We both know how this ends. Let's see how far she bends. We all know how this ends.
Thanks for the welcome, it's my first time here. You've made your feelings for me crystal clear. You play your show, I'll just go grab a beer. Didn't come here to quarrel with you.
Bends, we all know how this ends.
Guess I'm this evening's sacrifice. I'll see what I can do. You deserve a good show. Big hand for your usual MC. She's planned a brutal takedown just for me.
And while the music may not be for everyone, some of the songs could have used a little more time in the oven, and I do wish there were a bit more harmony to them. It kind of seems like when Tori wanted to put most of the focus on the vocals for a lot of the songs, which isn't bad, it just makes the songs feel a little more grounded and less epic or grandiose. Which may have been the point. Because while there is an overreaching murder mystery plot, the theme and message of the musical is more character-driven. But it does make some of the songs feel less memorable when compared to the other musicals I have or will talk about. With all that said, I really like this game. The characters are solid, the voice acting is great, and I've had a ton of fun playing through the game multiple times just to try out the different song variations.
I can't believe what I'm hearing today. If your story stops there, I've nothing to say. I can't imagine. I gotta say that I'm amazed I held my tongue for so long. Not such a fan of this old plan, but who's to say that you're wrong? Now shoulda gotta erase a memory when there's no chance of changing history. This guy that sacrificed his life so you can live in his place. Wish he'd drop by, cause man, I'd die to see the look on his face. You try to hide from your reality, but then come back with regularity. And if you notice a disparity, then what's the meaning of his legacy?
Usually I only replay a game this much because of the romances, but here it's also the song variety that keeps me coming back. I really appreciate the work that the composer put in here. Having to map out and plan all of these variations had to be a bitch to work on, but I'm glad he did it. I doubt it will happen, but I really hope they make a sequel to this game. I have a rule against pre-ordering, but I'd break it for this series.
I'm just a man who's trying to go home, even after all the years away from what I've known. I'm just a man.
So Epic the Musical is just one of those projects I just knew I would love once I had heard about it, and I had friends recommend it. But I kind of put it off for a while, mainly because knowing me, I'd probably become obsessed with it if it turned out to be good. And well,
I'm just a man of all that we have been through.
Your friends close and your enemies close.
Would you like to have some of the magic? I see a song of past romance.
holy shit, this is fucking good. I can see why the internet is obsessed with it. Epic is a sung-through musical adaptation of the Odyssey composed by Jorge Rivera Herrans, released as a 9-part series, or sagas, starting in 2022 and fully releasing in December of 2024. It currently has no official stage show or any official visual version at all. Hello lovelies, editing Nora here, so sorry if I sound a little different. It's a different day, and I apologize if you can hear my dryer. So about a week after I did all my original recording, the news dropped that we are getting an Epic movie adaptation that's fully animated. So that's interesting. I'm kind of excited about that. No news yet on if we're getting the original vocalist back. I kind of hope we are, but who knows. Either way, I'll definitely be watching, and I'll definitely be making a video about that when it finally drops. So that's exciting. All right, back to my original video. But there are several YouTube animators that have been creating animatics for the musical, though none of them have been able to cover every song. Which is fair considering there's 40 of them. As an adaptation, I personally think it's pretty solid. Jorge does change several details here and there, but the story is mostly intact. While the upbeat, poppy music might not be for everyone, I absolutely love it. The songs are memorable and gripping, and you can hear the emotion in all of the lyrics.
Just a man who's trying to go home, even after all the years away from what I've known. I'm just a man who's fighting for his life. Deep down I would trade the world to see my son and wife. I'm just a man.
I love that several of the characters get their own instrument types or lay motifs, even though that can make some of the songs clash with one another.
Have you forgotten the lessons I taught you? Have you forgotten the lessons I taught you?
Need some help?
Deep in the night, the fight lasts for hours. You can be hurt or you can be tough.
But I personally prefer a bit of variety in musicals, so it doesn't bother me much, but I understand why it bothered some people. And man, do I love these animatics. Each creator has put a lot of work and creativity in each video, all having their own takes and interpretations on the events of the songs. When I was making my own playlist on YouTube, I had trouble narrowing down my favorite version of each song, because most of them are just so well done and they each bring something different to love with each version. I adore Gigi's use of color, their animation is crazy smooth in places for not being a full animation, and I love their version of Odysseus' appearance. Zaymenia Natzel has a more comedic take on a lot of the scenes, which may not be everyone's cup of tea, but I love mixing tragedy and humor, so it works for me. Annie Flamis' Circe design is great, and Neil Illustrator really knows how to make the gods feel intimidating and grandiose. There's a lot more I'm not mentioning because gushing about the animatics could honestly be its own video, and there's probably some great ones I haven't seen yet, so I'm going to finish this part by saying I love the work and passion that went into making these, and props to every animatic creator. They're all doing a fantastic job of bringing the musical to life. I just love listening to this. It's been living rent-free in my head for months now, and I'm still not bored of it. Though there is one song in particular I often skip. Spoilers ahead. A huge trigger warning here, I'm going to briefly talk about a song that gets really dark. I'll put a timestamp here on the screen if you want to skip this part. So the song Hold Them Down kind of falls into the trope of using sexual assault, or in this case the threat of sexual assault, as a means of making us hate a villain character more than we already do. For context, this song takes place around the same time Odysseus finally lands in Ithaca, and like in the original story, the suitors do plan on killing Telemachus to get him out of the way. But Epic takes this plot one step further by having the main antagonist suitor Antonius, whose main purpose is just to be the voice of the suitors, suggest both the murder plot and a plan to assault Persephone once Telemachus is dead. And I kind of have mixed feelings about this, mainly because the open threat of assault on Penelope was not really there in the Odyssey. The suitors planning to kill the prince is there in the original text, yes, and is also evil. I'm not trying to say the suitors are innocent in any way. I'm just not the biggest fan of adding SA to a story when the whole point is, look how evil this asshole is. Wouldn't you like to see our hero kill this prick? Especially when the assault plot line is just there to motivate the men and has no bearing on the victims, usually women, but not always, story or character. But it is worth noting that assault of women in Greek mythology and ancient Greece in general happened, like, a lot. A lot. And while it has been a while since I've read the Odyssey, I'm pretty sure the suitors did assault the palace maids, so it's not exactly a wild interpretation. So I don't blame Jorge for including it here. It is worth noting how little agency women were given. Even goddesses like Athena were not fully safe from people trying to hurt them. And I hate to say all that because damn, Hold Them Down is a well-made song.
Where is he? Where is the man who can string this bow?
Screw this competition. We've been here for hours. None of us can string this. We don't have the power. Screw this damn challenge. No more delays. Can't you guys see we're being played? This is how they hold us down while the throne gets colder. Hold us down while we slowly age. Hold us down while the boy gets bolder. Where in the hell is...
But it is one I skip on most listens as it's just not fun to sing in the car, which is also kind of how I feel about Poison from Hazbin Hotel. I get why it's here, it's just not fun for me to sing later. Okay, uncomfortable topic over, back to the gushing. Honestly, I think my favorite thing about Epic the Musical is just the passion and creativity it both represents and inspires in others. I can deal with a lot of flaws in pieces of media provided that the work is born of love, not laziness or greed. No piece of art will ever be perfect, but I appreciate when creators put this kind of effort into their work. I also really like that this project started online and will probably remain there for some time. It allows people like me who don't get to see musicals live very often a chance to truly appreciate them in their entirety, rather than just listening to the recording and having to figure out what happens in between the songs by looking up the synopsis on Wikipedia, which was the only way I was able to enjoy Wicked before the movie came out. There's an article from the Oberlin Review that goes over this accessibility in more detail. I'll leave a link in the description. Also, the composer, Jorge, is currently working on a sort of prequel to Epic called Ilium, which is apparently going to be about the Trojan War. At the time I'm recording this, nothing is officially out for that yet, but that might change by the time I get around to editing, so apologies if this is slightly out of date. But I will say I'm looking forward to whatever Jorge makes. I love the story of the Trojan War, and I am definitely prepared for him to make me cry like a little bitch.
Then let the souls run through the river Styx. They ask me how I do it. They say Hades, how? We're in the underworld now. We're in the underworld now.
So if this next section sounds like a last-minute add-on, it's because it is. I originally didn't know about this next musical when I first started this script in... Holy shit, I started this in July. Wow, I am slow at writing. But Spotify had recommended something called Stories from Styx to me while I was listening to my musical playlist, so I gave it a listen, and while it didn't blow me away like Epic did, I really did enjoy it. Written and produced by YouTuber Casper Fox, Stories from Styx is a sung-through musical depicting various stories of Greek myths. There's currently not nearly as many songs as Epic, but that's fine, and I'm pretty sure it's still a work in progress. Like Stray Gods and Epic, it doesn't really stick to one defined genre for its songs. Lots of musicals, especially Broadway musicals, like to have cohesion with each song, and I do enjoy that as well, but I just love when a composer is willing to be flexible with their style in order to make the song more impactful. The song Titanomachy has a sort of mellow EDM vibe that kind of reminds me of Illunium songs, at least until it gets halfway through and the classic video game music kicks in.
Infirmary, it's like I'm born again. A brother reaches out, a lifelong friend. Before we witness moonlight, we are thrown into a fight. What's the point of fighting if we face eternal night?
Not my favorite, but I see and appreciate the vision. Shades feels more like a fusion of pop ballad and melodic bass.
Castles of gold, the story has been told. Lock myself within. I fear it's getting old. Open up, be bold. I have no next of kin. And I was meant to do the unthinkable, the impossible.
Casper's voice kind of reminds me a lot of Dylan Matthew. Particularly, Casper's performance in Shades makes me think of Dylan's performance in Love Is Gone and First Time that he did with the EDM group Slander. And I absolutely mean that as a compliment. I fucking love those songs. Styx is another musical that takes the story of Hades and Persephone and gives them a more romantic, less problematic relationship. It's not clear if they are going for the idea of making Demeter a bad guy, though. At least not yet. Between Demeter's song There Is No Name and the duet My Persephone, I'm getting the impression there might be some misunderstandings going on. Stories from Styx may not be perfect, but I'm appreciating the creativity that Casper Fox is utilizing here. It's probably not the first musical to use electronic sounds, but I really like the idea and I'm excited to see where this project goes. And I was not expecting to see familiar names like Lydia the Bard here, but boy am I happy to see it. I love everything she does. I also love that there's characters from all over Greek mythology here, not just Hades and Persephone. Casper also has a few reaction videos on their YouTube channel highlighting some fan animatics, which is really sweet. So while I can understand why so many people find modern adaptations of Greek mythology so frustrating, and there is definitely some bad adaptations out there, I really like seeing how these writers and composers are able to play around with the themes and ideas in these myths in order to tell original stories and comment on modern issues. One of my favorite things about Greek mythology in general is how it doesn't really have a set in stone canon. Ancient Greeks were constantly changing their own stories and even their gods to fit the narrative or ideals they wanted to convey. And in doing so, they provided some great insight into what was valued or considered to be true at the time these stories were written. It's something we see in a lot of modern takes on classics. Just look at how something like Dracula has been adapted or changed over the years, and you can learn a lot about what kind of stories people were telling at the time. Stories and art are a reflection of the society that made them, and Greek mythology is no exception. And I honestly don't think that's an inherently bad thing. Though, of course, it is worth remembering that these are stories to us, not an actual religion. So it's not really blasphemy for us to tell a story of Athena getting a character arc. While I do think if you find any of these stories entertaining, I would highly recommend learning more about the original myths and the gods. Modern adaptations don't really take away from those original stories, they're still there. And there's nothing stopping someone from getting invested in the originals later. Heck, my first introduction to the Greek gods was the Disney movie Hercules. And while I didn't know a damn thing about Greek mythology at the time, due to being 5, I did grow to love Greek mythology later, and while I haven't read all the source materials yet, I'll gladly listen to a podcast or watch a video going over the stories. And while I couldn't call some of these musicals a favorite of mine, I can appreciate the Camp of Golden Apple, the youthful angst of Mythic, the political messages and themes of hope in Hadestown, the exploration of trauma in Stray Gods, the creativity of stories of Styx, and the human story of Epic. So if you've managed to listen to me yap for this long, thank you. If you have any musical recommendations for me, please let me know. I'm Nora, and thank you for watching.